one of the biggest video game developers today, originally started off as a piracy group downloading games illegally and reselling them. And in fact, they have now become bigger than the studio they were stealing from, which I think is insane. I'm here to tell you all about the lore of video game piracy, purely because like most people, I've seen this tweet go viral about how piracy law is apparently insane. And that made me go down a rabbit hole of research to find out as much as I could, not just about these three people mentioned about in this tweet, but about video game piracy over the years in general. I'm here to share all my findings with you because it is crazy how interesting some of this stuff is. Before I do jump into it though, please do like and subscribe to this channel. I'm still trying to grow to 1,000 subscribers and it'd mean a lot if you'd help me get there. And comment below what you think about this stuff. Heck, if you're feeling very brave, tell me the last game you pirated. It's gonna be interesting to see how many people are brave enough to put that down there. Now, before we begin, I need to explain to you what de novo anti-piracy is. It's the most recent anti-piracy software that publishers have been using in all of their games. Essentially, it's a way to encrypt the game so it can't be played without the encryption key provided by the publisher. And it does it on the fly, so it's not like a one-time thing. If you remember games in the 90s, you'd have to put a key from inside the game case into like a key installer before you can install the game. That was the anti-piracy measure back then. It's essentially a updated version of that, where the key is not provided by the game anymore like back then. They would have a list of accepted keys. If a cracker got access to that, they could just give you a list of keys you can put in and it'd be accepted by the installer. Because they weren't really online back then. It was all installed offline, locally and stuff. So what de novo does is essentially the same process but multiple times throughout the game while it's being played, constantly checking to make sure you're not using a pirated copy of the game. Now the problem with de novo that everyone hates is the fact that it actually affects the frame rate of the game. And it's most noticeable if you've ever played any of the recent Resident Evil games, because Capcom have actually removed de novo a year after the game's release, and every single time they do it, there's a noticeable improvement in the game's performance. But de novo does impact the game's frame rate, which is something you don't want to do, right? It got to the point where it's ridiculous enough that pirated copies of games without de novo were running better than games were on launch. So you can see why this is all such a big deal. And it's a constant back and forth between pirates and anti-piracy, where they keep updating and then pirates race to crack the new version and then they update again. And all while this is happening, video game performance is just getting worse and worse. I'm sure most people, especially those who play on PC, would have noticed this sort of thing when brand new games come out with so many issues on day one. And it's crazy to think how much of that is just related to anti-piracy software trying to make sure no one steals the game. Now I'm going to start off by telling you about the third cracker that was mentioned in that tweet, which is the guy who only seems to want to crack, might be a team, I don't know, we know nothing about this person. They only crack Football Manager and they appear once a year, release a crack and then disappear. There's no other information that I can find about this person anywhere at all. I think they cracked a few FIFA games as well. But from the looks of it, they seem to know how to crack the de novo anti-piracy software. And they only care about doing it for football games. And the most recent information I can find about them is this forum post here, which suggests that they've retired now because the last game they cracked was in 2023 and they have no plans to crack any future copies of the game. And it's been about a year or so since then, so I don't know if this person is even active anymore. There's two other people mentioned in this original tweet. One is called EMPRESS, the other one's called FitGirl. And one thing this tweet gets wrong is it called both of them crackers who cracked de novo anti-piracy. And that's not entirely true for FitGirl, at least. So FitGirl actually is not a cracker, they are a repacker. I'll explain the difference between the two. So, crackers are the people who crack the anti-piracy software, such as de novo. So MKDev, who I just mentioned, is a cracker because they can crack through the anti-piracy measures. Empress, who is the other person mentioned, is a cracker because they can remove the anti-piracy measures as well. FitGirl does not remove any anti-piracy. What FitGirl does is they take cracked files of pirated video games and they repackage them to be smaller and easier to download, essentially making them more accessible to people who might not have the best internet. So in layman's terms, she's basically an optimizer. She makes pirated games more optimal and perform better and easier to download and take up less space on your computer. So FitGirl is not actually a cracker who tampers with anti-piracy, they just repackage the game. Empress, on the other hand, is currently the most popular anti-piracy, cracker at the moment when it comes to video game piracy, purely because recently she's single-handedly been able to crack de novo on games that no other piracy team has been able to do. And that includes games like Red Dead Redemption 2. Now, where the drama comes in is Empress seems to have a particular supervillain complex where they often go on very unhinged rants and end up starting beef with a lot of people, including people like FitGirl, who have been repacking the games that she's cracked. Now, the wildest thing I found whilst doing my research on this whole thing is the fact that Wired actually did an interview with Empress specifically about cracking games like Red Dead Redemption 2. And the article basically does give you a good rundown of the history of piracy teams cracking games and the release of Denuvo in 2014, and just how much the scene has sort of changed over the years. And the article even goes into mentioning with how these teams would compete to crack games before anyone else could, and how most of them vanished from the scene when Denuvo came out because it was so difficult to crack using traditional methods of piracy that most piracy groups just couldn't do it, and a lot of them actually gave up. And one even said that within 2 years, maybe piracy would be a dead scene and no games would be free. The article is quite lengthy, and if you're interested in reading it, I do recommend checking it out. I'll leave a link to it in the description below. But I want to move on to the next topic, which is the controversy around Empress and the unhinged rants that I mentioned earlier that she would tend to go on. Now, the first one I want to talk about is this run that she left inside the cracked version of Hogwarts Legacy that she released without Denuvo, and it contained this rant about trans people and gender, using some very colourful language, as you can see. I'm not going to read out because YouTube won't like it if I do. And the only thing I'm going to say about this is Empress would absolutely lose their effing mind if they found out about the number 3 existing, which I don't think they do considering all of this. I think Valve have actually successfully managed to gaslight people into thinking the number 3 doesn't exist. But this wasn't the only time that she went on a massive rant like this, because she also went on one about Indian people here as well, in which we see a lot more of a very colourful language. She also has a genuine disdain for males as well and men, which you can see up there. But this was also a contributing factor to why people in the video game piracy scene just did not want to work with her. I think the cherry on top of all the controversy surrounding Empress was the fact that she was also accepting donations via Bitcoin and cryptocurrency for her work, and it got to the point where she said she would only release certain games and cracks if they reached a certain threshold of donations like $500, which sort of left people in a spot where they had to either pay a certain amount to maybe get a pirated version or just buy the game itself and not have to deal with any of that. And you'd often see things like Empress trying to crowdfund the process of cracking Denuvo from certain games just so they can make money off the whole thing. And a lot of anti-piracy groups did address it specifically, saying that video game piracy exists because they should be free and people shouldn't be charging for it or paywalling it or asking for donations. And this probably created the biggest divide between Empress and every other piracy group. And in the end, the police did actually visit Empress. We have no idea how they found who she was or where she was, because nobody knew that information, but the police managed to track her down and apparently arrest her, but it didn't last long because she was eventually released, and she's been releasing cracks still since then, so it doesn't look like anything really came from that arrest. But in the end, she does live up to her name at the moment, being currently the only person who can crack Denuvo as efficiently as she does, because no other group or individual has been able to do the same. Like I mentioned, FitGirl is only a repacker who repurposes and optimizes pirated games, not actually cracking them. However, there is one more piracy group that I do want to talk about who used to pirate games but have now since gone on the straight and narrow and have gone legit, and that group is CD Projekt Red, who you might not realize used to be a piracy group. Both the founders of CD Projekt Red were originally people who would sell pirated copies of games. Specifically, they would take RPG games like Baldur's Gate and they would sell Polish translated versions of those games on the video game black market, so to speak. Because back then, games weren't exactly translated into every language outside of English. So a lot of translations in the early 90s came from piracy groups like CD Projekt Red. And when they wanted to go legit, what they essentially did is they became a video game translation company that would localize games into the Polish language. And in the end, they actually approached the studio they were originally stealing from, BioWare, and helped localize games like Baldur's Gate. And when they finally got enough money to actually invest more back into the company, they used the money they raised from localizing games to buy the rights for The Witcher and make the first Witcher RPG. And some of you might remember this a few years back. he actually tried to sue them because he sold them the rights to the Witcher's video game for a rather small amount. They offered him royalties, but he refused because he thought video games were lame and would never make any money. And then when he found out how much money The Witcher 3 made, he then tried to take them to court over it, which they resolved amicably and kept him as a consultant. But it was buying the video game franchising rights for The Witcher that helped them essentially make their own name in the PC RPG scene with The Witcher 1 and 2, and eventually The Witcher 3, and eventually Cyberpunk 2077. Which is interesting to think about because they originally got their start by pirating and translating games by BioWare, and now they've ended up as a bigger and more renowned RPG studio than the current BioWare even is. Which is wild to think about. But that's been my video about video game piracy law that I thought I'd want to share with you guys. It goes pretty deep, I think I've talked about it enough. If you enjoy this video, please do like and comment below. Subscribe to help me grow this channel. I'm still trying to get my way up to 1,000 subscribers. Maybe even share it with anyone you think might find it interesting. And I also live stream to this channel, so if you want to chat with me whilst I'm streaming, please do pop by. I'm always happy to say hi to people. And check out some of my other videos. I put a lot of work into them and I'm pretty proud of them, and I hope you enjoy watching them too. On that note, I'll see you in the next one. Sayonara.